I am William Sterling, 40 years old, and for the past 15 years I've taken pride in being the one who laid the technological foundation for Sterling Mart, the supermarket empire founded by my own father. From a rudimentary retail system, I transformed it into an integrated management platform, seamlessly operating over 40 supermarkets across 3 states. But as it turns out, in my father's eyes, I was nothing more than an overpaid name on the payroll. That day, I walked into the boardroom on the 12th floor as usual. The light from the large glass windows poured onto the long, glossy conference table. The chairs were all occupied, but the atmosphere was strangely frigid. My father, Robert Sterling, sat at the head of the table, his face as cold as a block of ancient ice. Beside him, James, my younger brother, sat casually, twirling the fountain pen my father often used in important meetings. "William," my father began, his voice not loud but razor-sharp, "the board has reached a consensus. The operating costs of the technical department are too high. Your salary—" He paused, his eyes locking onto mine, devoid of any trace of paternal warmth. "It's too high for what you contribute." I gave a faint smile. "Father, I believe I've helped the company survive 3 financial crises, 2 platform transitions, and I'm the one who wrote the entire supply chain management system we're using now." James smirked slightly. I could see a barely concealed glee in his eyes. My father shook his head. "You're deluding yourself, William. The company needs young, dynamic people who know how to cut costs, not convoluted, complex systems that no one but you can understand." "Cut costs?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean James?" The room fell silent. My father didn't respond. He simply slid a stack of documents toward me, a termination notice. Accompanying it was a minimal severance package, as if I were just a probationary employee who failed to pass evaluation. I clenched my fists. Memories flooded my mind, sleepless nights coding until exhaustion, moments of wiping away tears for unrecognized efforts, successful projects where others took the credit. And now, I was being pushed out the very door that was once called family. But I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I stood up, slowly buttoning my suit jacket, my eyes fixed on him. "You've just fired the only engineer who understands the entire critical system of Sterling Mart," I said softly, each word landing like a blow on the marble floor. "I hope the young person you're betting on knows how to save it when it starts to collapse." I turned and walked away. Outside in the hallway, the afternoon sun still streamed through the transparent glass, but for me it was the coldest moment of my life. Leaving the Sterling Mart building that day, I didn't go straight home. I walked along the long street, letting the biting March wind slap against my face. With every step, the lines of code I had written seemed to flash before my eyes. 15 years of my life, I had poured my heart and soul into something they so casually dismissed as convoluted and unnecessary. That system wasn't just complex lines of code. It was a living, intricate architecture connecting everything from warehouse management to transaction processing at the counters, to the loyalty program and the online sales platform. Everything was tightly interwoven, like the blood vessels sustaining a colossal organism. And none of it had any official documentation. It wasn't because I was careless. It was because my father, with his stubborn mindset of an outdated businessman, always believed that documentation was a luxury for the lazy. He once patted my shoulder and said, "We're family, trust is enough. Why bother with all that paperwork?" Looking back now, that was the trap I buried myself in, a system so vast that only I understood its entire operational flow. Every design, every optimized algorithm existed only in my memory and personal sketches, never shared. I remember the last time I proposed forming a dedicated team for documentation and succession training. My father scoffed. "Are you trying to burn more company money on those fanciful ideas? James told me the system needs simplification, not added complexity. Learn from your brother, William. He has a practical mind." My brother? James. His system skills were barely enough to patch minor bugs, reset devices, and read a few basic logs. But in my father's eyes, he was the young, dynamic talent with a fresh perspective. all because he knew how to nod at the right moment and say what my father wanted to hear. I quietly sat down on a stone bench by the river. As evening approached, the gray water flowed silently, as if washing away all my old memories. I wondered if they even realized what awaited them. No documentation, no one who understood the system's architecture, just James sitting there with a tangled mess of code like a labyrinth with no exit. I could almost picture him panicking when the system crashed, sweating profusely, not knowing where to begin. I let out a quiet laugh, bitter but also somewhat relieving. At last, I was free from that suffocating cycle. They chose James, they discarded me, and now everything I created would be the test of their decision. I returned home as the city lights began to flicker on. My small apartment on the 10th floor suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. I stood motionless by the window, gazing down at the bustling streams of cars below, my heart strangely hollow. So this was the feeling of being cast aside by your own flesh and blood, a pain so suffocating it stole my breath. This injustice wasn't new. It had been simmering for years like a shallow cut, not deep enough to bleed, but nagging, never healing. I recalled the times I was excluded from important meetings. Despite heading the technical department, I was never fully included in strategic planning sessions. Once I confronted my father directly. Why wasn't I invited to the meeting about the 3-year strategic development plan? He merely sipped his coffee, his gaze brushing past me as if my question were trivial. Your job is to handle the numbers on the computer, William. Don't try to meddle in the big picture. Meanwhile, James was paraded around by our father. From cocktail parties with major partners to tech conferences where he couldn't even deliver a coherent speech, my father introduced him with pride. This is James, my youngest son, a young talent who will take over Sterling Mart's technology division. I stood there, unable to believe my ears. I was the one who had fought tooth and nail to pull the company through every technological crisis. I was the one who rewrote the entire management system to save the company from bankruptcy. Yet in my father's eyes, I was just a technical mind who didn't understand the big picture. Perhaps deep down, he always saw me as dry, rigid, constantly talking about processes, risks, and stability. And James, he knew how to please our father. He knew how to say what our father wanted to hear, even if most of it was baseless flattery. I used to tell myself, just do your job well, and the results will speak for themselves. But I was wrong. In this world, not everyone cares about results. Sometimes they only see familiar faces, empty compliments, and well-timed handshakes. That night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. But amid the restless thoughts, an idea crept into my mind. If they had made their choice, let's see if they could handle the consequences. Barely 3 weeks after I walked out of the Sterling Mart building, my phone began ringing incessantly. Ascendingly, the calls came one after another. The first was from Lisa, the operations manager I had personally trained. Her voice was laced with panic. William, the POS system in the Western region suddenly stopped working. The machines can't scan barcodes, customers are lining up for hundreds of meters, and James, he can't restart the system. I let out a soft sigh. The POS system was the lifeblood of retail. If it failed, the entire transaction chain would grind to a halt. But I only replied calmly, Sorry, Lisa, I'm no longer responsible for that. I thought it was just a one-off issue, but no, the real nightmare was only beginning. The next day, 2 major supermarkets reported inventory management errors. Stock wasn't updating, online orders were stuck. Customers were told items were out of stock while piles of goods sat gathering dust in cold storage. I heard stories of store managers personally inspecting every crate, recording inventory by hand like we were back in the Stone Age. And James, the young talent, was busy, resetting servers and issuing restart commands in circles as if every problem could be fixed with a single button. 3 days later, I received a call from a familiar number. My father. William. His voice was hoarse, heavy, like someone who hadn't slept in days. We need to talk. The company. It needs your help. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and laughed. The sound echoed through the empty apartment, more bitter than tears. "You seem to have forgotten, Father. I no longer work at Sterling Mart," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady despite the waves surging in my chest. "Let the person you chose, James, handle it." I'll pay you a worthy fee," he said, his voice strained. It was the first time I'd ever heard him humble himself like this. "It's not about the money, Father," I said bluntly. "The day you signed my termination, you also signed away something else. The last shred of trust I had in this family." I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt my heart completely sever itself from the towering shadow of Robert Sterling. But I knew this wasn't the end. If my instincts were right, the real storm was still brewing behind those dark clouds on the horizon. When one door closes, they say to look for another. But for me, it seemed the door opened on its own, just in a different building. 3 days after my final call with my father, I received an email from Rachel Morgan, the HR director of Horizon Retail, the largest rival chain that Sterling Mart had always regarded with caution. The subject line was brief: "William, we need you." I sat frozen in front of the screen, rereading every word in that email. A direct offer accompanied by a promise. A 25% higher salary, full autonomy to redesign the entire technical infrastructure, and a team of personnel I could handpick. 3 hours later, I was in Rachel's office. Without beating around the bush, she looked me straight in the eye, her gaze sharp behind her thin-framed glasses. "We've been watching Sterling Mart for a long time. When we heard they were foolish enough to let you go, I only had one question. When are you ready to start?" I smiled, a rare smile after weeks of exhaustion. "Right now," I replied. The work at Horizon was exactly as they had promised. I no longer had to convince anyone of the value of sustainability or the importance of documentation. Horizon's leadership understood that a retail empire couldn't stand on a foundation of carelessness. I set out to build a new system from the ground up. This time, I did everything right from the start. Every line of code came with accompanying documentation. Every change was rigorously tested. The concept of "only I understand the system" no longer existed. I recruited young, ambitious engineers not to grind them down with work, but to teach them, to help them deeply understand what they were building. I held weekly workshops and even wrote a dedicated manual on optimized retail management systems, something Sterling Mart had never valued. Each passing day felt like I was creating something truly solid, not just to prove my father wrong, but to prove to myself I could start over from scratch and do better than ever before. But just as I thought things were falling into place, an urgent message from Rachel arrived late one rainy afternoon. "Greenway Foods is threatening to terminate their contract with Sterling Mart. They're looking for a new partner to manage their entire supply chain. Do you think we can seize this opportunity?" I stared at the screen. A golden opportunity was unfolding before me, not because I wanted to bury Sterling Mart, but because this was a chance to prove that sometimes letting go is the beginning of something greater. News of Greenway Foods threatening to cancel their contract with Sterling Mart spread like wildfire in a dry season. Everyone knew Greenway wasn't just an ordinary partner. They were the primary supplier for nearly 60% of Sterling Mart's fresh produce and packaged goods. Losing Greenway would be like severing the arteries of an already dying body. I didn't need to imagine what my father and James were going through. The boardroom must have been thick with the stench of crisis, heated arguments, and James sweating, stammering excuses for system failures he was utterly powerless to fix. What surprised me was that Greenway reached out to Horizon Retail just one day after announcing their intent to end their partnership with Sterling Mart. Rachel was the one to break the news, her smile barely concealing her excitement. "William, they want to meet you. Greenway's operations director specifically requested you." That afternoon, I was in Horizon's 18th floor boardroom. No need for theatrics or lengthy presentations. Anderson Grant, Greenway's operations director, looked me in the eye and said, "We've reviewed everything. Sterling Mart can no longer meet our requirements. They've lost control of inventory, deliveries are wrong, their customer loyalty system is paralyzed. We need a partner who can handle large-scale transactions with no room for error. Can you do it, William? I didn't hesitate. I can do more than that. I guarantee that within 10 weeks, Horizon will have a system ready to handle Greenway's entire transaction volume. And this time, it will have no single point of failure. He crossed his arms, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. What assures me history won't repeat itself. I smiled and pulled from my pocket a plan I had prepared in advance, a step-by-step system transition blueprint, every process documented, every team member fully trained, and the entire infrastructure designed with distributed fault tolerance. I don't repeat history, Mr. Grant. I rewrite it. 3 days later, Horizon signed a multi-million-dollar supply chain management contract with Greenway Foods. And on that same day, Sterling Mart's market value plummeted uncontrollably. But I knew this game wasn't over yet. Within just 3 months of signing the historic contract with Greenway Foods, Horizon Retail swiftly overtook Sterling Mart, becoming the fastest-growing supermarket chain in the region. In stark contrast, Sterling Mart sank deeper into crisis. Its supply chain was in chaos, the inventory management system was paralyzed, and numerous supermarkets were forced to temporarily close due to insufficient stock. The breaking point came when Sterling Mart lost an entire quarter's worth of transaction data due to a system failure, sending its stock prices into a relentless freefall. Under immense pressure from shareholders, Sterling Mart's board of directors was forced to consider selling the conglomerate to salvage what little remained. And the entity leading the negotiations was none other than Horizon Retail. I was personally invited by Rachel Morgan, Horizon's HR director, to join the negotiation team. The talks stretched over 3 grueling weeks. Sterling Mart initially tried to hold firm, citing their long-standing brand value. But every figure they presented couldn't mask the truth. They were drowning in financial and technological ruin. Horizon relentlessly drove the price down. When Greenway Foods officially terminated their final supply contract with Sterling Mart, my father's empire lost its last lifeline. Sterling Mart's board had no choice but to accept Horizon's offer, a mere 40% of the market value Sterling Mart had once commanded before the crisis. On the day the acquisition contract was signed, I was at Horizon's headquarters. Rachel placed the final agreement in front of me, along with a set of documents bearing a silver-embossed title. Plan for the restructuring and integration of Sterling Mart. Project leader, William Sterling. Rachel looked at me, her gaze a mix of scrutiny and encouragement. Are you sure you want to take this on? After all, it's still your family. I responded without hesitation. My family made their choice, Rachel, and now it's my turn. The day I stepped back into Sterling Mart's old headquarters, it didn't feel like the return of a victor. There was only a quiet emptiness seeping into my heart. My father was there, visibly aged in just a few months. The once proud man who had dominated the retail industry now sat shrunken, silent behind the large conference table. James stood beside him, head bowed, his face pale as if he'd just been handed a death sentence. There were no formalities, no polite exchanges. I walked in, back straight, and spoke with cold clarity. As of today, Sterling Mart is officially part of Horizon Retail. I will lead the restructuring process. And this time, we'll do it the right way. No budget cuts, no personal favoritism. Everyone, including James, will start from zero. My father made a feeble attempt to salvage his last shred of pride. He opened his mouth to protest, but ended up only nodding faintly as if words had lost all meaning. I concluded the meeting with a statement devoid of malice, merely the final affirmation of a man fulfilling his role. Sterling Mart was once a point of pride, but it's also been a costly lesson for us all. Any empire built on favoritism and arrogance is doomed to collapse. Looking at my father in that moment for the first time in my life, I no longer felt small in his presence. Within just 1 year under Horizon's leadership, Sterling Mart, now a subsidiary brand, underwent a complete transformation. The new technological system I built ran as smoothly as a well-oiled machine. Every link in the chain, from warehouse to checkout counter, from supply chain to loyalty program, operated with precision and efficiency. No more emergency late-night shifts to fix system crashes. No more desperate calls in the dead of night begging for someone to save the situation. Horizon's revenue skyrocketed, dominating the regional retail market share in less than 12 months. Horizon officially became the leading retail supermarket chain, a position Sterling Mart had once held but lost due to its own arrogance and obstinacy. One late afternoon, I received a call from my father. His voice no longer carried the pride of old, replaced instead by an unfamiliar quietness. "William, can I see you?" I agreed. We met at a small cafe, the same one I used to take my mother to every weekend before she passed away. The sight of my father sitting there in an outdated suit, his hands clasped together on the table, tugged at my heart. He looked at me for a long time before speaking slowly. I'm sorry. For being blind, for not seeing that you deserved so much more than this. For the first time in my life, the man who had always stood above everyone lowered his head and admitted his mistake to me. I stayed silent for a moment before responding softly. "I don't need an apology. I only hope you understand that. No success can be built on favoritism or personal ego. If you truly want to change, start with James." He looked up, his eyes tinged with sadness but also a hint of relief. "I know. He needs to learn everything anew. Can you help him?" I nodded, but not as a brother, as a teacher, and only if he's willing to start from zero. A few months later, I officially launched the Retail Engineer Training Program, open to all young people with ambition but limited access to advanced technology in the retail industry. James was one of the first to enroll. I didn't treat him as my brother, nor did I dwell on the past. I taught him what was necessary, with the same strictness and fairness I showed every other trainee. A year later, James graduated from the program with decent results. He came to see me, his eyes filled with an understanding I'd never seen in him before. "Thank you," James said. "I used to think I knew everything, but it turns out I knew nothing at all." I gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "What matters isn't how wrong you were. It's that you've now learned to stand up the right way." Looking back on it all, I realized I never truly needed an apology or recognition. What I needed was my own growth and the growth of those around me, and I had achieved both. The greatest success sometimes doesn't lie in defeating those who once hurt us. It lies in standing up, moving forward, and letting the results speak for themselves.